Just think about for the general public who are middle-aged, between maybe 20 and 50 years old or 55, what is protein doing when we eat it? And what does it mean when we eat enough protein?
So you're making sure that you're getting enough leucine per meal. So it's not necessarily the protein, right? Because you've got pea protein and soy protein, but it is really the amino acids that are necessary. So as you age, you get this thing called anabolic resistance, right? So the protein that you ingest becomes, it doesn't quite stimulate the body the way that it should, the way that it did maybe perhaps when you were in your 20s. So you require more of this over a period of time. What's happening though right now is that there's this anti-animal narrative. So we're talking about having more plant-based proteins. That is the single worst piece of advice that I could ever give anyone. And I actually trained as a geriatrician. So after doing 2 residencies and a fellowship in geriatrics and obesity medicine, my job was to help aging individuals. And the single, I'll say it again, worst piece of advice you could ever give someone who's aging. And I have to say, we're all aging. And then as we advance in age, the other way to then stimulate it is through resistance training and protein.
Right.
But as we age, that becomes more challenging. So having high quality protein really, even as you're young. So yes, you can get away with it in your 20s, but if you have any issues with body composition, the obesogenic model of an individual is also similar to an aging individual when it comes to tissue.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the way that muscle responds to protein or needs protein.
That's right.
You talk about this term muscle protein resistance or muscle.
Well, you mean in terms of
anabolic resistance of the muscle?
Anabolic resistance, yes.
Okay.
The more the body is inflamed, the more obese it is, the less healthy the muscle tissue.
Let's talk about the threshold. So what I've heard you and Don talk about is 2.6 grams of leucine per meal or in a meal to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Do you still think that's a reasonable number?
Right. And we know that we need
2.6.
That's right.
In one meal.
Yes, sir. Right.
To trigger sort of the switch.
Mm-hmm.
That means muscle turns on, muscle sort of repairs, muscle is maintained. That's what's happening when we get this sort of leucine trigger, is the signal to the muscle to say, stay where you are, maintain your strength, maintain your vitality, maintain the lean mass in the body.
One of the things that we cannot argue that is hard and fast is the quality of protein. The amino acids are the amino acids. It's really easy to get essential and non-essential amino acids, truly, right? That's not the issue. Mm-hmm. We are talking about having enough amino acids at a particular dose to trigger a physiological response.
And specifically, if we just break it down, we're thinking leucine here.
You can't, right.
Basically, the conclusion is that as we age, we need more protein to trigger this response. And as we age, we need more protein.
That's right.
Which is, and I want to talk about this too, which really flies in the face of this narrative that is growing now that we should be limiting our animal protein.
This is actually dangerous advice. And, it's interesting when you look at the age of people arguing. I mean, what? They're, between 20 and 50. In terms of plant-based, it's the worst piece of advice you give people. Muscle is directly related to mortality and morbidity, right? So the stronger you are, the more muscle mass you have, the better your survival. Cancer. What kills individuals with cancer? They will die from cachexia,
right?
Which is muscle wasting.
Mm-hmm.
That kills them. So if you fall and you break a hip, you end up in the hospital and you have sarcopenia, which is considered a disease of aging, which is loss of muscle tissue, loss of strength. You will never make it out. I have been at the bedside of hundreds of dying individuals. Me, sitting there, where everyone else is talking about, oh, you should go plant-based and it doesn't matter as you age, and you should continue to fast and it doesn't matter as you age. I'm thinking to myself, how many of you have actually sat there? I am telling you that experience would change that narrative. It would change the story.
I'm thinking of sort of an amino acid reservoir in the human body.
Right.
And muscle is this amino acid reservoir. If somebody's playing a video game, they have this bar that goes across, and that's their life force.
Yes.
And
I love that.
I think we could think about the amount of muscle on your body as an amino acid reservoir, which is almost like your life force. And if our life force goes down, if our amino acid reservoir goes down, we are getting closer to the next life. We are getting closer to dying.
So it's true.
And and so when someone is having cancer, they are depleting that amino acid reservoir, and then they will die.
A much bigger risk factor of cancer in general is obesity.
Insulin resistance tied to that, perhaps.
I mean, if you look at any of the cancer websites, being overweight is a risk factor.
Animal protein. So there's
the original superfood.
Right, exactly. Like I couldn't agree more.
I mean, really?
Yes, like the thing that made us human.
Yeah. And we found that there's 2 ways to stimulate muscle. And when you're younger, it's driven by hormones, insulin, growth hormone. So you don't really need as much protein. People think, well, you're growing, you need more, but actually it's your hormones that are stimulating the muscle. However, as you age, what happens is the body becomes more resistant to the hormones. And there's only 2 ways to then stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and that is either through exercise or diet. And diet, when we talk about diet, we talk about the right amount of protein intake at the right time and the right bolus amount. So it's not just having 100 grams of protein over the day, which is the very minimum all your listeners and subscribers should have. There is something called anabolic resistance that happens to the muscle. And what that means is that the body becomes more resistant for the tissue activation, for mTOR signaling. The hormones naturally are lower, and the amount of protein needed to stimulate mTOR is higher. And mTOR is stimulated by leucine, and that is the driver for muscle health. It's an anabolic protein, and it becomes this cascade of events that happen that allow for muscle to turn over and to be synthesized. And muscle is so important because it's the organ of longevity. I mean, muscle is an organ, just like the heart. Mm-hmm. The healthier your muscle is, the healthier your life is going to be. It's the largest unit for glucose disposal, the largest site for fat oxidation. So when you think about it, everything centers around muscle. As people age, they actually require more protein at once. So what does that mean? That means they need around 50 grams at one time. That's a lot of protein. And what is so interesting about sarcopenia and the anabolic resistance is I believe it's starting earlier. Really, the research shows it starts in your 40s and 50s, but we're becoming so inactive that I think it's starting in the 30s. Mm-hmm. So loss of muscle function, muscle strength, fat infiltrates the tissue.